Good morning. I'm Meg Riley here in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and you've joined us for another week at the VUU. It's a somber morning, I'm sure, for many of us as we digest the undigestible news yesterday of absolutely no accountability in what's been really clearly labeled a homicide of Eric Garner. So I think we're a little sober from that. We are, however, excited to have a couple of exciting guests who I'll introduce after we have our regulars say good morning.
Hi, I'm Joanna Fontaine Crawford, and I'm in Austin, Texas.
And I'm Aisha Hauser, and I'm in Seattle, Washington.
I'm Hank Purse, and I'm in Medford, Massachusetts.
And I'm Tom Shade in, where am I? Ann Arbor, Michigan. And Patrice, you got to unmute.
Yeah, I'm Patrice Curtis, and I'm in Washington, D.C.
I think that's everybody. So I wanted to introduce our two special guests today. We'll be talking about the new immigration movement and some exciting news coming out of our Denver congregations on new sanctuary. Also wanted to introduce, so it's Emrys Staton, who's a volunteer with No More Deaths in Tucson, Arizona, and also a candidate for VUU ministry, and Reverend Kierstin Homblette, who is the coordinator of Beloved Community Ministries in Denver, a coordination by 10 of the congregations there in Denver. So we'll be talking to them about immigration issues, not at all, I think, a separate topic from the police brutality and lack of accountability that I was mentioning earlier in the case of Eric Garner. And I think for all of us coming so on the heels of no indictment for Darren Wilson, I would say the best news here in Minneapolis is that the organizers are strong and committed and fabulous. I went to a meeting last night where I was one of about 3 people who were older and just really strong, young, brave energy, primarily people of color, and just really willing to interrupt life in a good way. And so that was inspiring because I was pretty depressed yesterday. And so to see the new leadership that's coming up, I think is, for me, the silver lining in all of that. How about the rest of you where you are? We've had a few demos last night, and we're going to go into them full tilt today around this. Other people?
Well, we got to be done by noon here because I have to get downtown because there's a demonstration downtown on the campus this afternoon that I want to be a part of. So I'm not quite as depressed as you are, but maybe because I'm just so inspired by everything that goes on. The fact that there were, demonstrations all over the country. I'm old enough to remember back in the day, the day.
That day.
Back then, you are too, Meg. But really, to have this number of demonstrations going on across the country within, 8 hours of a decision is really remarkable. Really remarkable. That did not ever happen back in the day.
Social media.
Social media.
There's a protest tonight in Boston that that coincides, not that surprisingly, with the big Christmas tree lighting on Boston Common, and it was sent out by Facebook. I got it last night, sent to me by another colleague of ours, and as of I just checked right now, it's over 5,000 people have said yes, I'm going to this protest tonight. Now, how many people, a Facebook. Yes, isn't necessarily worth the paper that it's not written on. But still, the fact that 5,000 people, have said, I'm going to go, and a number of our colleagues I saw, have said they're going to be there, and that's a powerful statement, I think, too. Just, they were talking about it on the radio this morning that over 4,000 people have said yes, they're going to come to this, which is me to say. It's also a lot more than usually go to the Christmas tree lighting in any of our cities. So I think that's it's a statement of people. It's even if you thought that that there was some gray area in the Ferguson case, there's no. I mean, he was resisting arrest, yes, but like, here's a video of this man dying that we've had to watch, that anyone can watch, and to sort of say that that isn't enough for the case to be heard is outrageous. So I'm glad to see people are. I think, as Tom had said last week, I've thought a lot about that. There's a growing sense of people going like, all right, no, we're gonna do something about this. This is and it's not just the police. I think it's a larger system of institutionalized racism that is that is in the air that many people didn't realize or now can do something about acknowledging it.
Yeah. We can't be blind anymore. And even folks when you hear people on Fox News thinking this was a bad decision, then you really have to stop and realize just how egregious it was, because it was caught on video. Really, I mean, Seattle hasn't stopped protesting actually since the non-indictment in Ferguson. So there's been something every night, and there was actually a quite annoying business dude on the local NPR station here complaining that the protests are getting in the way of the Christmas shopping business. So I was actually thrilled to hear that. I'm like, good, because when people's pockets get affected, suddenly something will happen, hopefully. So there's been something here every night in Seattle.
That's the same thing that I would say about DC, that there's been something every night. In fact, last night? No, night before last. When I came out of church after a meeting about, Ferguson, what All Souls community wants to do with the greater DC community, there was in fact a protest, walking right by with lots of police escort, which is good because it was during rush hour. They went across major streets. So yeah, people are engaged. When I looked at that, the folks who were walking that rally, there were, I guesstimate, maybe about 100 or so not a huge turnout, but good enough. And it was really heartening for me to see just an incredible mix in every way you can think. Generationally, diverse. There was even a little bit of ableism. So it was, I don't know, and that was before the Eric Garner result. I don't know. Maybe we keep saying this though, right? Maybe we're at a point, maybe we're at a point, maybe we're at a point. Only history will tell us, but we can be hopeful.
Right.
Although I have to admit, today, I'm not feeling so hopeful, because I thought if any case, this was not even to me a case about the general legality. This was an officer who went against police policy. I mean, surely there should be, I don't know, it just feels to me like there should be some response to that. It seems like there's always wiggle room, but when someone uses a technique that's been banned by the police, then you think, okay, well, here's the police policing themselves, I mean.
And Obama came out strong last night. This was the Ferguson, he was trying to walk a line. You could see he was trying to be careful, but he came out very strong, and I was very happy to see that there was no ambiguity with him.
And he said, he wants to see action, not talk. I was glad that he said that. Here in Austin, on the University of Texas campus, I think they're setting up for it right now. There's going to be a demonstration today, and then on Friday there's going to be one at the city courthouse.
Yeah, so this national movement.
I just want to say it was kind of sad this morning. A friend of mine who's serving church up in New Jersey said that she was coming off of her run and she was walking through an elementary school park, or back to the school, I guess. And she said she heard what looked like a couple of 10-year-olds talking, and she heard one say that Obama is trying to destroy the country. And her commentary was like, it starts so young, and it's just so sad.
Yeah. Yeah. And yet, yes, absolutely. There's a lot to be said about, and I do feel that it's a moment for a movement that I haven't seen around these issues, partly because of social media, and partly because now we've seen it, we've heard it, that I think that there's just so much visible material to use for pretty much anyone, because everyone has phones now to take pictures. So I personally think that the Truth and Reconciliation panels are a good way to go. I think that could be a good way for UUs to get involved, to push for those locally so that people hear the stories. Yes Magazine had a good article about this from a long-time civil rights activist, and I have wondered if, can you have a Truth and Reconciliation hearing if nothing's changed, because like, say in South Africa, they had those after the government changed. But I think that there would be a lot of ways to do that here that would be very helpful, simply to have times of listening. So that's something that I'm going to start trying to figure out how to have some effect pushing for.
Well, speaking of truth, did anyone get on Twitter last night and see the trending topic of criming while white? And if so, what do you think of it?
Yeah.
What is this?
So last night, the trending thing on Twitter, it was the hashtag criming while white, and it was a lot of, from what I saw, a lot of honesty of people getting on who were white and talking about, one of the ones that stayed with me was a woman who said, like, when she was 18, I can't even remember what her crime was, but she was caught in the act, and the police officer prayed with her and asked her to turn her life around and then let her go. But it was things like that, people talking about, I had DUI and they let me go, and all of these things that happen all of the time, that if you have white skin, it's okay. It was just a one-time occurrence, right?
Mayor Giuliani's daughter caught shoplifting.
Yeah.
I mean, I talked about this in my sermon last Sunday. I had a friend. He had posted this on Facebook, and I asked him, and he said, sure, talk about it. And he said that he starts off by saying, I've been a drug user, a drug dealer, an abuser of women and men. I have I've punched police officers in the face. I've done all these horrible things that, if it was true what everyone else was saying about Michael Brown and everyone else, he said, then I should have been shot. And he said, like, I'm lucky because I'm white, and the color of my skin, that I've had, I'm able to go into job interviews and no one asks if I've been in prison. Which, of course, he said, of course I have been in prison. I've been in lots of institutions. And it was a really powerful thing. It was the most powerful part of the service, and also him, and my question last Sunday was that if this guy is able to, who's done a lot of work, and if he is able to see the way white privilege has worked, so should we. So should we, who haven't had to go through all of those things to see how white privilege works. We need to be able to understand how it's been, how we've benefited from that.
I was going to post on that, but 140 characters was too short. So, okay.
So, Tom, what's your criming while white confession?
A lot of different. I have had relatively few encounters with actual encounters with the police, but there was a period of time when I went through the West one time, probably skipping out on restaurants more times than I paid, and there was a while there where my friends and I basically shoplifted dinner almost every night. So, in addition to all the drugs and all the other stuff, so.
Kierstin, what?
Oh, I was just going to say, here in Denver last night, we had a event downtown and a march to honor Eric Garner that was planned by Kenny Wiley, who I know you all had on the VUU recently, and his group, Coloradans for Justice. And it was a great event, but you may have seen he posted last night about some of the tensions that appear sometimes at these events with a lack of understanding of intersectionality. So when people are raising up one narrative and using that narrative to keep the stories of other people quiet. We also had issues with a lot of white people wanting to tell their stories at an event that needed to center on Black people. And so I think one of the things that really raises up for me is how we can learn to trust the truth of other people's stories without needing those stories to reflect our realities. I was really struck by that.
Amen.
And,
I've been really thinking about that Unitarian Universalists are, in a good way, devoted to holding up things that we're told to the light of our own experience, but how also that can really be just dead wrong in situations where what you need to do is trust that just because you haven't had an experience doesn't mean it's not true. I think that's really some holy work for us to do that could benefit us in so many ways.
Mm-hmm.
It's really one of our real Achilles heels.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It plays out in all kinds of things: theological understandings, understandings of oppression. So
yeah. Well, and I think that's when it becomes important about what are the ways this is making it into our congregations. It's great what's happening in the streets, and there are many UUs there, but what does that look like in our beloved communities? That's the real challenge, I think, too.
That is the real challenge, and people have been a lot of ministers have been posting about pushback that's been coming as people have been speaking out and acting, and the congregations, some of the white people in the congregations are like, okay, we did that, let's move on, let's get over that. And I've been thinking especially about how it is for people of color in leadership in primarily white congregations, because it's hard as a white person to, sometimes you just want to say, whack, it's so finding the ways in, I think, to do some soul level healing here is really, really sacred work, and not easy work, I'd say. I've been praying on a blog for a couple days about that. I just can't stop thinking about Darren Wilson's testimony. I just feel like we should all be talking about that testimony. I mean, that testimony said so much about soul damage of white people. I mean, that was
referring to someone as a demon. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
And these are the people who are going to protect and serve.
Right. Demon. I mean, just the idea that somebody who's being shot at would lunge towards you, like, who are you? This is not a human being you're describing. So anyway, yeah, I feel like we've got some work cut out for us, that we who are white and talking to other white people about this stuff.
Sometimes, though, at these moments of high stuff, a big part of leadership is to just get out there ahead of the crowd, even though people don't like it, and they find it bothersome and they want to push back. You can't get yourself too much caught up in bring along all the stragglers at this point. This may be the time where you go, you may not understand what I'm doing now, but you're going to have to think about it.
And it happens to everyone. I mean, I have been posting this several places. I would tell anyone who's listening, go and Google MLK Guidelines for a Constructive Church, because he had to get up in front of his church and say, you can fire me from the church, but you can't fire me from the ministry. And I've got the truth here, burning in my bones, and I'm going to preach about what is happening. And some people may not like it, but I still have to do this.
I just read a piece of MLK's eulogy at James Reeves Memorial. And MLK has a line in there. I mean, he calls out many, he calls out the church, he calls out the police officials, and he also calls out, those, Negroes, as he called them, as we were called back then, calls the Negroes who weren't, you know, doing anything. So yeah, I mean, you have to. When I wrote a pastoral letter on behalf of the ministers at All Souls, and you know, I acknowledge that there are people who have, you know, police officers in their own family. You know, I acknowledge that this is hard stuff. You know, it's just not you know, black and white, for lack of another way of putting it. It's complex, and yet through all of that, we have to, you know, remember, you know, what the beloved community, what we want to see as a beloved community. You know, we have to struggle with this stuff. I also preached on Sunday, and we had a very long prayer on Ferguson. So my sermon just simply talked about the fact that, you know, when Darren Wilson decided to be a police officer, I highly doubt that he thought, hey, you know, what I'm going to end up doing, or, you know, is shooting an unarmed teenager. And yet, by being in that system and through his experiences, and by not being probably conscious of the ways in which his internal thought processes and feelings were changing, he got to the point of shooting someone. And it was really, I was lucky that there was a great New York Times article about a police officer in Ferguson who seems to be very well respected by the black community. You might have seen it. You know, they asked for him. He doesn't wear riot gear. And so it is not a case where, because the color of your skin dictates how you're going to think. You have the ability to be intent and to be intentional about how the world impacts you, and at least to be aware of it. You know, I wanted to get away from that idea that just because somebody is a white police officer does not, you know, necessarily mean they're going to act in a particular way. And this is the way in which we just have to struggle with this stuff, you know, but we have to be intentional sort of all the time, as much as we can anyway. Because it's when we're not intentional is when this stuff leaks in, and then we have a thought and we're like, did I really think that? You know, we surprise ourselves. You know, we surprise ourselves. You know, it's just, it's really tough. The other thing that's really interesting is I was at a rally last week, and I had two TV crews basically say, oh, we don't want to talk to you, we want to talk to a white person about this. And I thought, okay, now this is really interesting to see that happening. Yeah. And it was a case where they walked up to us, and I was standing with some colleagues, you know, and the question was, well, you're a white person, why are you here? You know, and then the other crew, so that was an Asian American crew, and then the other crew was two young black guys who were, I don't know what show they were on. And they kind of apologized to me, and they said, it's really important that we show the variety of the folks that are here. I was like, yep, no, that's fine. But it just kind of, it was like, there's just there's a lot of interesting stuff going on around this.
There's a lot of interesting stuff going on. Yes, there is. Well, our guests today are doing some interesting stuff, and I think I want to start with talking about the border work. Emrys, you were on the border. You've been on border trips down to the Tucson, Mexico border. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, I live on the border here in Tucson.
Right on the border.
Host Border Links trips and other delegations. Yeah.
So you know, we're talking about how people wake up, and I assume that one way that people wake up is to go see something that we've never seen before. What do you hear from people who go on those trips, who are seeing things new that you see all the time there?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big things is just drawing the links between the kinds of violence that was just part of the discussion you guys were having of the profiling and you know, hyper-militarized police forces that will react and then ask questions, if at all, later. And you know, we have a border and law enforcement regime here that's very similar, that's highly weaponized, that has, you know, we've got a whole history of folks shot and killed, abused, beaten up, money stolen, whatever, as they're coming across the border and interacting with Border Patrol, as one example. And so I think when folks come down and see, like, wow, this is what's happening to Spanish-speaking Latino or Indigenous people coming up from the South, and it's the exact same thing that's happening to people of color, in our cities all over the country, and to immigrants in our cities all over the country. That the institutionalization of it is becoming even so much bigger, and I think it's hard to wrap your heads around. So I see the two things. I see the aha moments of like, oh yeah, this stuff's all linked together, and then I also see the, oh wow, this is massive. What do we do? So kind of both of that.
Interesting. So have you done a bunch of these trips then for a while? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I working with a humanitarian group. One of our big thing is just bringing in volunteers, and we see that it's an opportunity not just to say we put water out in the desert for people that are crossing, but it's an opportunity to open up that space so that folks can come from all over the country and all over the world and do that work with us. And so I think what we've found is that in doing justice work or humanitarian work, that it's also an educational opportunity. It's also a moment where people get to be exposed to those realities and to the people, and then you start hearing the stories of folks coming across the border. I mean, I think of all the stories I've heard of people I've met in the desert, and even if you only have a few minutes and you get a little bit of their background, it's like, wow, this is such a major, it's such an amazing opportunity, and it's also one of the things where it links not just the structural stuff here in the U.S., but then we see, okay, what are the trade policies and what's the war on drugs and all this doing in other countries too? And really hearing those stories from people that are fleeing that right now is really quite remarkable.
Was your experience there part of your call to ministry, or how does that fit together for you?
Yeah, I mean, it was one of those things that for me coming out of college thinking, oh, I'll go somewhere else in the world and do something, and then realizing that I have a pretty significant issue right here in my backyard to be involved in. And so the humanitarian work was the first step, and now it's all kinds of solidarity efforts. And I was just thinking of the rally that I was at yesterday was for the 43 students that were disappeared in Ayotzinapa, students in Mexico that were presuming, not alive, kidnapped by a collaboration between state police and the mafia, the cartels, and the same weapons and everything that are probably used all over the U.S. So, I mean, that's where we're at here on the border, is we're looking at all this stuff coming together. So it's a huge opportunity for ministry and for all that too. So that's where I feel like I fit into that.
You were recently arrested for something? Tell us that story.
Yeah, so we have this kind of atrocious thing here in Tucson called Operation Streamline, where people are put through the court system every day, about 70 people, and they're given about 15 minutes with a lawyer and then immediately charged and sent to prison and deported. And so we blocked it. We blocked 2 buses that were bringing the folks in for a day about a year ago, and I was part of a backup crew that blocked the gates of the courthouse in case the buses got away from the people that chained themselves to the tires of the bus. So we just got convicted of that about a month ago, and today I'll be in federal court for sentencing for that action.
Well, good luck.
What do you expect to happen there? Do you have any idea?
No, it's funny, the prosecutor doesn't even have a recommendation. They sort of don't seem to care too much about it. So I think I have no idea what the judge will do. I've just been preparing my little bit of statements I get to say before we get sentenced, but I'm guessing some community service or fine or something. Yeah.
Sentenced to community service. I mean, that's pretty ironic for a VUU minister to community service.
It's a great point, because I was arrested before for putting water out in the desert. They gave me a littering ticket for that, and I was also convicted and given community service. And I wrote the judge a letter back, and I said, I was doing community service, so I refused to do your community service.
That's great. Emrys, I have a question about the political, Arizona seems like, to me, like Florida, like an incredibly frustrating state politically, because you still have Jan Brewers, right, that kooky governor. So what's going on politically, and what kind of organizing is happening to try to combat what she has been pushing through?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, what I've seen the last few years, which is just incredible, is so much immigrant-led organizing efforts that that are really remarkable. And in Phoenix, especially, where it's not just Jan Brewer, but the history of the sheriff there of Arpaio has been, just terrorizing the communities and ripping families apart. The way the community has responded, the immigrant community has responded, is really amazing. And that organizing is spread all over Arizona. So Tucson, I see a lot more of the border-oriented stuff. And then Phoenix is a lot where the kind of resistance to what Brewer's doing and what the sheriff is doing. But it's really led to kind of what some of I heard you guys describing too, is a lot of youth, a lot of queer people getting involved, and doing the organizing that needs to be done to keep their community safe and keep their families together, and then finding our roles to support that when we need to be there.
And when you're saying safe, are you saying from the police? Because I'm not understanding your sense of safety the same way that I think I'm hearing you say safe from people like the sheriff and militants and vigilantes who are just out of control.
Yeah, it's all of that, and you have to remember that, especially, and I'm not sure with Obama's recent announcement if this has ended or what I heard exactly, because it's still confusing to me, but the police are deputized as immigration enforcement. So when you see a police officer, you're basically looking at a police officer and a Border Patrol person all in the same uniform. So keeping yourself safe means when, all this stuff, and it happens all over the country, when you're pulled over for your taillight out, and then all of a sudden they find out you're undocumented, and then all of a sudden you're, being detained and threatened with deportation. That's the kind of unsafeness that I think a lot of our communities face, but Arizona's been the sort of petri dish for that, for sure. And the vigilante stuff, I mean, in Arizona with SB 1070, it basically made citizens, if they see that a police officer didn't interrogate somebody that seems, suspicious of being undocumented, the citizen's job is to report the police officer. So it turns us all into vigilantes. It turns all the cops into Border Patrol, and it turns the whole state into this, very dangerous place to be for folks that are brown,
Now, Tucson is a liberal city, isn't it? Am I wrong about that?
Yeah, relatively.
I mean, yeah. So I'm wondering about the congregation. Are people in the congregation in Tucson involved with No More Deaths or Border Angels or other groups that are doing this work? Are you connected to any kind of a task group or anything there? Or are you doing this more?
Can I tag on to Meg's question, because I was going to ask about what other churches were doing, not just UU, but just if you could kind of give us a state of,
yeah, so the humanitarian group No More Deaths that I've been working with is a ministry of Unitarian Universalist Church of Tucson. So there's definitely that direct connection right there. When I was at the rally last night for the students from Ayotzinapa, there was church members there. I work with the youth group, and I've had them out in the desert putting water out. We've got people in Sanctuary and other churches here, and so the ministers from the various Southern Arizona UU churches and youth have come to Sanctuary vigils. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of overlap. And the faith community at large in Tucson, the progressive faith community has a long history with sanctuary movement stuff from the 80s and all kinds of stuff from civil rights and before that, for sure. But they've been incredibly active in promoting human rights as one part of advocacy, but also we have two churches that are actively providing sanctuary for people right now. One's a Presbyterian church, and I think the other one's a Methodist church. And so we've got the whole gamut of direct action down to advocacy with the faith community in Tucson. So it's a pretty amazing place to be as far as that goes.
Speaking of congregations offering sanctuary, I want to bring our other guest, Kierstin Homblette, into the conversation here. You're up in Denver, Kierstin, so the dynamics there are a little different than being right on the border, but I'm curious how the congregations there got so involved in the immigration issue, and if you could kind of do what Patrice asked for, kind of, give us the context for organizing in Denver there with UUs and others.
Sure. So I would definitely echo what Emrys said, that there's an incredible amount of immigrant-led organizing happening here in Denver. And the tenor is different, I think, than being directly on the border. But it's still really inspiring. And like he said, also a lot of youth-led stuff that's happening, student-led stuff, and certainly faith-based work. So our sanctuary, we have a coalition of congregations called the Metro Denver Sanctuary Coalition. And that coalition launched before we had someone physically in sanctuary. But the impetus for starting the conversation about sanctuary came from an immigrant member of our community who asked if there was a church in our community that would consider offering sanctuary. And through our partners at the American Friends...
Describe what that means. Can you, I'm not sure everybody knows what it means to offer sanctuary as a church.
Sure, yeah. So you may be familiar with the concept of sanctuary from the original sanctuary movement in the 80s and 90s, when churches took in migrants from Central America who were fleeing violence and repression there. And that movement was often quite secretive, so it was more of keeping people secretly in the churches to protect them. And this new sanctuary movement involves helping undocumented folks who request sanctuary to stay in the church and sort of do what we're calling insulate them from immigration and customs enforcement. So there's no law that says that ICE can't come into the church and remove someone from sanctuary, but it's been their policy not to do that. Probably you can imagine it would be a PR nightmare for them, sort of elbowing church ladies out of the way to get to someone who's staying in the church. So what we have taken it to mean here is that the person who's in sanctuary needs to stay physically within the property of the church to receive that insulation. And the idea is that sanctuary amplifies the voices of that person and the millions of people who are just like them in our country. And so it's a tool to make their story heard, to help people understand what people are really going through. And then it also provides them a little bit of insulation to take the time to fight their deportation case. Is that helpful? Good. So anyway, the Metro Denver Sanctuary Coalition is made up of 6 congregations right now. 4 of them are Unitarian Universalist. And there's one congregation, First Unitarian Society of Denver, that's hosting someone in sanctuary. So someone is physically in their building. And then the other 5 congregations are officially supporting congregations. So they're helping do the work to support First Unitarian and the person who's in sanctuary there. So they're helping to provide meals, they're helping to provide volunteers to stay overnight at the church, they're helping to do fundraising, they're helping to provide moral support, they're showing up to events that we do and all of that. So it's certainly not something that I think would be easy for one congregation to do on their own.
That's a lot of support for one person.
It is, and sanctuary is not something that's an easy choice for someone to make, for an immigrant to make. You know, sometimes we get the question, if you offer sanctuary to someone, won't folks be lined up outside asking to be offered sanctuary as well? And that's not what we've seen. It's an incredibly difficult choice. It's a huge sacrifice for someone to basically be in another kind of prison. You can't physically leave the property. You can't work. You can't see your family as often as you want to. And you are shoved into an incredible spotlight, a national spotlight, where your story and your family's stories are out there for everyone to see, and you don't have much privacy at all. And as you can imagine, a lot of church basements are pretty freaking spooky. So it's also not a fun place to live.
Yeah, we had back in the 80s when I was a DRE at First Universalist in Minneapolis, we had someone in sanctuary in the church, and I felt really bad for him. You know, I mean, I didn't even like working late in that big building, and nobody was after me. So do you have people there around the clock then, staying there at night?
Yeah, so we have volunteers who stay overnight. The person in sanctuary at First Unitarian's name is Arturo Hernandez Garcia, And there are folks who volunteer to stay with him every night. And there have been a couple of moments where they were really glad there was someone there. There was this really sort of scary and funny now incident where a cleaning crew came in at 4 a.m. and was working in the basement, and no one knew that they were coming who was staying there. And so there was this very intense moment of there's someone in this building with us and we don't know who it is. And it ended up being fine, of course, but I think to be there by yourself would have just been absolutely terrifying.
So is it staying overnight with them? Obviously, it's for sort of, well, it feels like sort of moral support. But is it also to witness in case the police come or something, or is that part of it? Do you have a protocol, I guess, if that was to happen?
Well, we have talked about that, and the agreement is that we will not resist if ICE comes into the church to take Arturo. That the act of them doing that would blow up this whole issue so wide that that I don't think is necessary. But yes, I think it would be really scary to have the staff come in the next morning and he's not there and no one knows why. So certainly being a witness is an important piece of that. I also want to say that the New Sanctuary movement started 8 years ago, and since that time, ICE has not entered a church to come in and get anyone who's been in sanctuary. So this is a conversation that we've had that in some ways it's a hypothetical. I just don't think that that's going to happen.
I'm curious from, Aisha, go ahead.
I just ask if anyone to representatives of
I didn't hear that very well. Try again? I don't know if it's me or you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Has anyone spoken from the sanctuary movement spoken to anyone from ICE about this?
Yeah, so one of the things that we made sure to do the day that Arturo took sanctuary, which was October 21st, is that we called ICE to let them know what was happening. So he had a pending appeal for a stay of deportation, and we said, hey, we're going to give you a heads up that this person is entering sanctuary, so if you want to do the right thing and offer him this stay before we blow up the media, you can do that. And this was the first time that someone had taken sanctuary in this particular region covered by a regional ICE office, and they were not even particularly aware of what that was. And so they did not take that opportunity to offer him the stay. We also called the mayor's office in Denver and the police and other folks who we thought might get a call from the media or other government folks so that they wouldn't be surprised and not be aware that this was happening in our community. So it's very different from the original sanctuary movement. None of this is a secret. It's completely above board. Everyone knows it's happening and that he's there and what our hopes are.
Kierstin, how does the sanctuary fit into the rest of the immigration work that's going on in Denver? And I'm also interested from Emrys, what do you think, I mean, obviously the dreamers and the immigrants themselves are doing such amazing, inspiring work. What do you think is most effective roles that you've seen Unitarian Universalist congregations serve in the immigrant rights movement?
So I would say this is intricately connected to all of the other immigration justice work that's happening in Denver. And I think it is another way for the religious community and a community that's often an ally community to really indicate that we are willing to take risk, we are willing to have skin in this game with you, and that we are willing to follow your leadership and walk beside you as you work toward justice. There are lots of other things happening in Denver. There's work with Children's Immigration Court. There's work with the detention center here. There's work with the government. So we had a very successful legislative session a couple of years ago where we repealed our version of SB 1070, which was called SB 90, to end that cooperation between police and ICE officials. And I think sanctuary probably couldn't have happened if all of that organizing hadn't have already happened in our community, and that Unitarian Universalists had the information and had chosen to be involved with that. I don't think that sanctuary would have been a possibility for this congregation if they hadn't taken the time and the years to get invested in the issue and invested in folks' stories previously.
I'm wondering about how. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. I'll hear your question first, Patrice. Oh, okay. I would agree a lot with what I heard Kierstin describing as just a huge gamut of things that individuals and congregations can be involved in, but especially in this issue, I think the challenge really is seeing how UUs can almost take not the front vocal cheerleading role, but do some of the behind the scenes stuff that you don't even get recognized for. And for No More Deaths, as an example, and I'll talk about Sanctuary too, but what the UU Church that hosts the Ministry of No More Deaths does is a lot of the administrative work, and they're doing, they're helping with the bookkeeping and they're helping with all that. And I think at first the congregation was really, and they do get some recognition for it, but they wanted to be out, and they wanted to be out in the desert too, and they realized that that's just not where a lot of the folks in the congregation are at. So it's instead sort of doing the nitty-gritty work behind the scenes that enables the stuff that gets more attention, and I think that's kind of an interesting shift, maybe for UUs to think of like, oh, I'm doing something, but it's not what's getting me in the spotlight, And I think with all the immigrant-led organizing, with youth, with Dreamers, with all the stuff that's going on, I mean, the opportunity there really is to like get behind and help out. And we may not get much recognition for that, and that's okay.
Well, and I would also add to that, I think that the question around sanctuary got people involved in our congregations that were not going to be out at the detention center, were not going to be at a rally. It involved questions for architects in the congregation about how should we create this space in our building for someone, and what are the codes that we need to pay attention to. And, the folks whose ministry is hospitality, and how are we going to make sure this person feels comfortable in our building, and how are we going to teach them to use the kitchen. And so it's exposed people who are not involved in justice ministries, who have not been interested in immigration questions before, which is so exciting to see. And I really hope it's a model for other kinds of justice involvement that we can do, this really deep relationship building and direct involvement with real people who are impacted by the issues that we care about, which is above and beyond the usual wonderful things we do, like signing petitions and writing letters and going to rallies and things like that.
Do you feel, the both of you, do you feel like this work is helping UUs learn how to be better allies?
Emrys, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always that opportunity in any situation, and in this case, becoming a better ally also kind of means like trying to learn Spanish, trying to be in just everything that comes with being an ally that means that it's not about you. So I think that's what I see as a big challenge for this, and an opportunity, along with everything that I hear Kierstin saying. Yeah,
I would add that we've been doing some really intentional work here in my ministry with folks around the idea of companioning, which I think is a really different question than being an ally. How are you walking with someone? How are you listening to their story? How are you being willing to sit with them in their agony, in their rage, in their fear, and not need to fix their problem for them or come up with a solution, but simply be willing to be there. And so, like you were saying, Meg, a lot of folks said, I could never stay in that church basement. We shouldn't do it because it's not a great place for him to live. But the Sanctuary is an invitation from the immigrant community to walk with them and to be led by them. And so if someone says, I want to stay in your church basement, then our question is, do we say yes or no? If someone's knocking on our door, do we open it or not? There are lots of really difficult logistical questions. There are lots of questions about risk. There are lots of questions about priorities. But I think it really comes down to that question that we hear in that Sweet Honey in the Rock song, would you harbor me? I mean, that is the question, right? That is the core of it. And it's a real, it's a spiritual question, not a logistical question.
That sort of ties in with kind of the question that I've been sitting with. When I went with, actually, I co-led a group to Tijuana, Mexico as part of the VUU Justice Ministry of California trip to the border. Stayed in Tijuana, had the opportunity to sit and talk with deportees. Tijuana is a place where folks just get dropped off, you know, and they're not from Tijuana. You know, they have no way to get to where they are, you know, deeper into Mexico, and they end up there, and it's just, there's some really just horrific living situations that end up, you know, people end up on the streets and in the canal, and it's just horrible. One of the sort of heartbreaking and uplifting moments that I had was being invited to co-lead a worship service at the fence, where families come on Sundays to sit and talk with each other through this fence, those who have been deported, with those who are still in the United States. And it was 3 of us ministers, one who lives in Tijuana, one who lives in Southern California, and then myself visiting. And it's just, and it happens every Sunday. And I was thinking about that. I wondered how you all see the public, you know, the public face of faith being expressed, you know, in the rallies or being, you know, out in the desert. I mean, is there an opportunity to have that expression in those moments, or is it kind of, you know, is it difficult? And if it's difficult in the moment, is it somehow being reflected in our sanctuaries on Sunday?
Wow, that's a wonderful question. I think looking at it just from the humanitarian work, I mean, we're constantly looking at the death and suffering. You know, I just talked to someone who came across the remains of some migrants in the past week, and just what does that mean? And we're constantly out in the desert building shrines and building memorials and trying to, if we can get people identified, you know, remembering the names. And we've got a pretty long list of names now that is in our collective memory. And I think that's where I see a lot of the need for the ministry and the faith to come in, is just kind of confronting that reality and helping everybody sort of understand that and cope with that and figure out how to make something better out of that sort of suffering. But then also, and I heard with what Kierstin said too, is just being able to sit right with people in their misery and knowing you can't fix the problem right then and there. And that's probably one of the greatest challenges to any faith that I see, is like knowing that bad things happen to good people, and just that's that.
Yeah, well, and I would say here in Denver we've had some very public opportunities for faith expression. When our tour entered Sanctuary, we held a laying on of hands for him and his family, and prayed him sort of into the building, and had a moment where we tied ropes to the doors of the church so that everyone standing there could physically help to open them and symbolically help to open them. And we also had a time when we had folks come and encircle the whole building by holding hands and sort of symbolically saying we are willing to protect you with our bodies and with our sacred space, which I think was really powerful. But I absolutely agree that there are also those quiet moments of service that folks are engaged in that will never get seen by anyone accept Arturo and maybe not even him in the ways that we're responding to his needs and his family's needs. And it's my real hope that people will take that relationship that they're building with him as a friend and as a neighbor and as someone residing in their sacred space and extrapolate it out to the millions of other people who may or may not be covered by Obama's announcement of reprieve, that we know that our work continues beyond this one person and this one family, but right now our work is with this one person and this one family.
Amen. Well, thank you both for your work. It's Aisha, you trying to get in there?
Yeah, I was getting a little emotional. I am an immigrant. I came as a toddler, and my father, thinking about him being a New York City cab driver, and had the political situation been different in the early 70s, I don't know where I'd be. It's an existential question, of course, but I just feel like we shouldn't have borders. I feel like my life would be so different. And I actually did not get naturalized till I was 19. So I always had to make sure I knew where my papers were until I was 19 years old from when I was 2. So it was always a kind of a scary feeling, but it wasn't quite as scary for those who are Mexican and coming over the border, like American. But for me, it definitely was something I was very aware of. So anyway, thank you for your work. It was just bringing up emotion for me.
Is it okay if I take a minute to offer a couple of suggestions if folks are interested in participating in this?
You go.
Sanctuary case? So we currently have a fundraiser on Faithify for the Metro Denver Sanctuary Coalition, and I'm ecstatic to say that we've met our goal, but that does not mean we can't raise more money, and that money gets split between the expenses of our host congregation and the expenses of the families that we walk with. So we're helping to make it a little bit less difficult for them that their main breadwinner is unable to work right now. I would also say that Arturo loves to receive mail and cards and support. You can send it to him courtesy of the church, First Unitarian Society of Denver.
Oh my goodness, you're saying this in the presence of religious educators.
The other thing is that as that First Unitarian and folks at First Unitarian really need your support too. If you can write to them, if you can write to their minister, Mike Moran, if you can write to their immigration ministry, those folks need bolstering, and they would love to know that people across the country are with them and thinking about them as we work on this here in Denver. And then the last thing that you can do in your community is that you can contact your local chapter of the American Immigration Lawyers Association, or AILA. They're going to be starting to offer clinics where folks can fill out their paperwork for deferred action for parents and deferred action for children based on Obama's announcement recently. So you can offer your congregation as a site to host a workshop where people come and get help filling out their paperwork, get assistance from a lawyer. The number of people who applied for DACA a couple years ago, this is 10 times as many people who will need assistance with that. And so that's a wonderful way that you can use your space as a sanctuary in your community. And then the last thing I would say, go ahead.
If you'll send us those links, we'll put them up on the CLF Facebook.
Yeah. So the last thing I would say is that the UUA developed 10 steps to doing sanctuary in your own congregation, to choosing to become a part of a sanctuary coalition or to offer sanctuary in your congregation. And so I'll make sure that folks can have that resource as well.
That's great. Emrys, any last words from you?
Yeah, one big thing that's going to be coming out for us with No More Deaths is a report called Shakedown that documents the money and belongings that are stolen from immigrants when they're taken into Border Patrol custody. That'll be coming out next week, and there'll be lots of opportunities, I think, for advocacy around that. That if you check out the website for nomoredeaths.org, we'll have a lot of information on that, and that's something that we'll be building a nationwide campaign around to get better oversight and control on how Border Patrol does their detention practices.
Thank you so much for your ministries, your work, for representing us in the communities so well. And that concludes another week at the VUU. We'll see you again next week. And until then, thanks so much. That's Bob LaValle behind the chalice, who helped us with tech today. And thanks to all of you. Thanks again, Kierstin and Emrys.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us. This is wonderful.